Hi, everyone. We are back, and we are pleased to have Yvonne Chotzen back with us. She was a panel participant last year, and this year she's a speaker. So, Yvonne, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a joy to be here. And I want to start by just acknowledging the amazing work that you're doing in the world as a speaker and a speaker who gives all of us as women the opportunity to tell our stories, because your unique story makes you unforgettable. I'm going to start mine in the federal lockup in downtown Honolulu. Arrest! Arrest! They shouted to me. I was the duty attorney in Honolulu at the Federal Defender's Office. Rare to have a murder case, and even more rare to have somebody arrested who is a female charged with a crime like that. I raced as fast as I could to the U.S. Marshal's lockup. You see, when you're a defense attorney, you have a few minutes before your defendant, who's just been arrested and probably been hauled like this person was across multiple states, planes, trains. You have no idea how they got there, because I was practicing in Hawaii, as I said. And so I met with her and got a little bit of her story, as much as I could in a short time. She was a young blonde woman. And the first thing she said to me was, I'm innocent, but I know I'll never be able to prove it. Never, never, never. In a few minutes, the U.S. Marshals pulled us all away. We didn't even have time to find out what the nature of her case was. But unfortunately, when we got into the courtroom, I found out that, in fact, yes, not only was there a murder involved, there was a triangle love affair that involved a child kidnapping. This was a case where it would be very difficult to get a client bail, but I was a vociferous advocate. I argued on her behalf, and although we didn't get bail that day, I got some concessions from the judge that would make her life easier as she was held in the lockup. I wasn't always an advocate with a voice that could speak powerfully on behalf of others. But that day was the beginning of a new journey for me. Let me take you back to the day everything changed for me when I was a little kid. Like all of us, I was what you would call just an innocent child. Here's me at 4 years old, and I'm blowing out a dandelion. I'm so in touch with the memory of that and the innocence I felt, because all I had to do in my life was play. My mom was a portrait photographer. She was called across the country to the funeral of her father. And I don't know if her judgment was poor on the way back or if she was grieving for her just newly departed father. But she came home that day all excited about the fact that she'd met a lovely elderly gentleman on the train who lived by himself. He was an artist, and she was going to incorporate him into our family as a newfound friend. Well, one day I was taken by him to be babysat. That was a fatal mistake in the trajectory of my life, because he took me to his locked private apartment, put me onto a bed, pulled down my little red corduroy pants, dropped his pants, and put his fleshy, white, hairy thighs in my face and uttered these words: "This isn't going to hurt you." But in fact, as he put the full weight of his body over me and penetrated me, the pain was excruciating, and I could barely breathe under the weight of him. I was so terrified. And yet when he pulled off me and put his strong hands on my shoulders, looked into my eyes and said these words, which changed the trajectory of my life for the next 10 years. "You are a dirty girl. You're a dirty girl. And if you tell what happened here today, I will kill you. I will kill your little sisters, and I will kill your mom and dad. You're never to tell. In the next weeks and months, and even over a year that followed, Clark Sherman, that was his name, he was around our family a lot. I stayed away from him, but it was a challenge for me because my voice had been silenced. Why don't mom and dad see that he's a bad man? Was the thought that I always had inside me. I was more and more numb as the weeks went on, the fear, the presence of him. But there was one saving grace in my life that made me feel so safe. And that was that every single night, without fail, my father gathered all his children. At that point, our family was a family of 4 siblings. He gathered us into his big armchair onto the bed and wove stories, made up stories. And I lived for that safe time of fantasy and began telling stories during the day to the little ones. And gradually, as the family grew from a family of 4 to 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 brothers and sisters, it became my job to be the storyteller. And so those strategies that I learned as a storyteller became cemented early in my life. Storytelling is the through line of my life, and that's where it started. Because as you know, if you're around children at all, to corral them and bring them together at bedtime, especially when there's 7 running around, I had to call out, story time, brush your teeth, come to the bedroom. And everybody would come running. And then, of course, I'd have to start a very exciting story that would bring them all together. But the purpose of the stories and my responsibility to put them to sleep required that the story get slower and slower and sleepier and sleepier, so that by the end of the story, everyone was sleepy or asleep already. What a great training ground. We, as a family, my siblings, we got cardboard boxes and we cut holes in them, and we did puppet shows on the weekends. We took burned out light bulbs and covered them with paper mache, and we were known as the Chotzen Birthday Party Club. And we would go around to birthday parties and we'd get money for it, and we'd get birthday cake and storytelling, storytelling, storytelling. But besides the world of stories that I plunged into, I would say my voice was very silenced. And that went on for a decade. And as I grew more aware of my feelings, I went to college. I had problems being touched. I felt repulsed. I didn't know why. And the other thing that was building in me was a great rage at my mom and dad. So there was a period where I dropped out of school, came home to live at home, and my anger was so great. I didn't understand the source of it. And they asked me to do some counseling. And so there was a journey back to myself that started with just an amazing counselor. Her name was Mary McCabe, and I met her in a rundown little office in a basement in Seattle. And she changed the trajectory of my life. How did she do that? She started asking me, "What happened to you? What happened to you?" You see, the trauma of what happened had been completely occluded. I had no idea that I had been raped. I had no memory of it. And one day when she asked that question, out of the blue popped the words, Mr. Sherman. And a rush of memories came back. And I don't know what intuitively moved my therapist, Mary McCabe, to do this. She was a very large woman, and she stood up and she came across the room and she gently shoved me down onto the couch where I was sitting. And she lay on top of me with her full weight. And she said, This isn't going to hurt you. And at that moment, I screamed, I pushed against her, and all the occluded memories started flooding back. And over the weeks and months of counseling, first the terror of what had happened, getting back in touch with the pain, remembering him wiping off the blood on my little legs so that it wouldn't show when I went home to be picked up by my parents, all of it, it came back. First the fear, and then the grief, weeks and weeks of sobbing in her arms, and then the rage. I was simultaneously working in a program called EST, which some of you may remember, where in groups of sometimes hundreds, people would process with leaders who stood on a stage with microphones. And at the graduation for EST, we were invited to bring people in our life that we needed the courage to tell the truth to. I invited my parents. They didn't know what they were coming to, but they were game. And they came up on the stage with me, and there were almost 500 people present in that room when I told my parents that they had left me with a rapist. And in fact, years later, we did find out that he was brought up on morals charges and lost a Boy Scout troop that he ran. In West Seattle today, there's still a monument to him, which many have tried to get taken down. And telling my parents the story of what happened with tears streaming down my face, asking them, how could you have been so thoughtless, so careless with your own children? And they wept. And I don't think I would have had the courage to have that embrace unless the multiplied awareness of hundreds of eyes supporting us and watching us was there. That experience trained away the rage and gave me compassion for them and gave me compassion for myself. And what it also did was realize how electric, how purposeful we can use our rage and our anger. And I went to law school. And from that moment, as a federal public defender, I used my voice on behalf of indigents who had no voice, who made a mistake, who got into a mess, who made a wrong turn in their life. And it was a powerful experience for me. Every case, I honed my storytelling skills better because, as I told you before, you have a few minutes in the lockup. And those minutes with a person who's just been arrested determine often what can be the course of the trajectory of their whole future. Why is that? Well, when you're before the judge or the magistrate, the question is this person trustworthy enough to get bail or to be put in a secure situation? And if the answer is we don't think so, or the judge isn't sure, and of course the prosecutor, your opponent, is arguing for that person to be locked up, then for the rest of the trial, they come to court in an orange jumpsuit, leg chains, and sometimes handcuffs that are unlocked in front of the watching jury. How do you think that prejudices the outcome of the person's journey, hopefully with an impartial audience? So those first few minutes of finding their story, extracting it quickly, were another training ground for me. Well, on the particular day of the case that I mentioned, where the young blonde woman came into the courtroom in the triangle love affair, the murder case and the child kidnapping, the feelings were so intense. They ran so high that the case was transferred to downtown Los Angeles. You see, in the federal system, the United States is made up into districts. Hawaii is part of California, Oregon, and other states that make up the Ninth Circuit. So any judge can hear a case. And that's why we were transferred to Los Angeles. And there I was with the courtroom filling up with people. I couldn't understand it. It was a rainy Wednesday morning in downtown Los Angeles. Why are all these people pouring into the courtroom? What's going on? Well, I reached out to the prosecutor. Well, who are all these people? Why is there this rush? And the prosecutor grabbed his legal pad and wrote, they're all producers, Hollywood producers, and they want the life rights of your client. Because you see, it was right when true crime was very hot as it still is today. And I thought, this is my moment. Because you see, after over a decade of advocating on behalf of the indigent with all my heart and soul, I wanted to tell my stories to an audience bigger than a jury of 12. So I saw my opportunity. I'm going to grab the golden ring. Nothing's going to stop me now. And I jumped up and I said, Your Honor, recess, recess. And we were rushed down. I had to go through the public elevator. I was in such a hurry that all I could do was grab a pen. I went down with nothing else. But my client, Kathy Brown, was sitting in the lockup, and on the table where she was sitting, the U.S. Marshals had given her a red apple and a single white napkin. And I said, Kathy, what do you want to do? There's producers circling like vultures. They want your life rights. And Kathy took a deep breath and she looked at me and she said, Yvonne, she said, I know I'm not going to get out of this situation. I know there's going to be jail time. And she told me details of the story. You see, the kidnapping was the kidnapping of her little daughter, Christy, because what had happened was that on Kaneohe Air Corps Marine Base, she was a lonely Marine wife. Her husband, Chris, had been shipped off for months and months, and she ended up foolishly, sadly, having an affair with his best friend. And unexpectedly, after months, without notice that she saw, Chris walked in to their little apartment on Kaneohe Air Corps Marine Base and caught them in bed. A terrible fight ensued, blood everywhere. Chris ended up dead. Fortunately, little Christy, their daughter, was at a nursery school on the base. Kathy lost custody of Christy because her mother-in-law back in Alabama got an adultery ruling that because of the adultery, she was an unfit mother. Her mother-in-law was named Mary Brown, and Mary was very powerful in the small town where she lived and had a huge mansion that far outsized what everybody else lived in. And over, Kathy tried to get access to her little girl for visitation. She went to the home several times and the police were called. She was hauled away. And then Mary Brown and her husband, Jack, they even put up barbed wire walls, very high walls. Kathy just couldn't get access to her little girl, even though she tried hiring an attorney. She tried everything she could. But she knew, like all Southern small towns, there was one day of the year where everyone poured out into the community. What day do you think that was? Of course, the 4th of July. So Kathy covered her blonde hair with a black wig, and her sister did the same thing, and they hid in the bushes. And her sister's boyfriend had a car running that was also hidden there. And they waited and they prayed. And then their moment came. Little Christy, who is now 6, came running across the field, chasing a ball. And that was Kathy's moment. And she dashed out into the center of the field and grabbed little Christy and said, "Mama's here, baby. I've missed you so much." And she grabbed her daughter and ran back to the waiting car, and off they took. And if you know anything about federal law, it's this: once you cross a state line, a federal case begins. And Kathy fled from state to state to state across 7 state lines. And during the weeks and months that Kathy was moving from shelter to shelter, Mary Brown rounded up all her volunteers in a rage, and they printed wanted posters with huge pictures of Kathy and Christy, because Mary knew Kathy had no resources, and it was just a matter of time. And sure enough, one stormy night, Kathy had to pull into a shelter, and unbeknownst to her, it was raining, she was wet and bedraggled, and she had Christy in tow. Unbeknownst to her, behind the desk was a wanted poster of Christy Brown and Kathy Brown. And so Kathy was given warm clothes and a hot bath, as was Christy, and some food, and shown to a room. But she was locked in. And before dawn, the FBI were there. She was extricated back to Honolulu. And that's how she ended up in lockup the day I met her as my duty charged. And so she told me this case, and she said, "Yvonne, I know when she turns 18, she's going to have been filled with hate by Mary Brown about me, because she was also charged with conspiracy as a participant in the murder. I, to this day, believe she had no knowledge of Chris coming home. But there's a charge, a kind of charge in federal jurisprudence called a Pinkerton charge. It's like a conspiracy charge. And if you're present when a murder takes place, you can be charged as well." And that was the charge that was laying on Kathy. And she knew she was going down probably for years. And even if she came out, she wouldn't have access to her daughter ever again until she turned 18. And she said, "Yvonne, get lots and lots of money for my baby, so when she is able to leave the Brown household, there'll be a gift for her from her mama, and she'll know that I love her deeply." And so there I was with the charge of going to the network. And at the network, which was NBC, I affiliated with one of those those other producers that had been circling me. We picked one of them. We went in, and I was charged with pitching for the first time in my life. Pitching, I never pitched before. What if I mess up? And then I thought to myself, I've been fighting with my voice on behalf of those who are voiceless for over a decade. Their freedom was at stake. All that these executives, who all had like $300 black Armani t-shirts on and black jeans and black high-top tennis shoes, it seemed like that was the uniform of the NBC executives. I thought, all they can do is say no. And so I went for it, heart and soul, and told her story. But they didn't say no. And not only was it a movie, it was a 4-hour movie, what they call a mini series. And it was called A Matter of Justice. It starred Martin Sheen there on your screen and Patty Duke. And it was NBC's highest rated movie miniseries in 8 years. And my phone was ringing off the hook. Overnight, I was a Hollywood producer, all because of a story. And I was riding high. It was like exhilarating. I took a leave of absence from the Federal Public Defender's Office, and I reached out to other attorneys around the country because of federal practice. Public Defender Office is a nationwide law firm, and people sent their stories to me, and I was pitching stories. It was an exhilarating time. But then all of a sudden, it was like over. I didn't know anyone. I was the new kid on the block. I couldn't get a phone call returned. I couldn't get into a movie lot. I was turned away. I thought, I've left law for this. I was despondent. How can I break in to this closeted world of Hollywood? Then I heard that Mrs. Rosa Parks and her team were looking for the right producer to bring her story to the world. And I remembered growing up in inner city Seattle, Mrs. Nelson in my 4th grade classroom had put a picture, it was actually a poster of Mrs. Rosa Parks. She put it on the bulletin board, and underneath was the word courage. And she told us the story of Mrs. Parks and how she had come out of Montgomery Fair department store on a busy December night during the Christmas rush and gotten on to the segregated buses. The buses were set up by law in Alabama that only people of color, they had to sit in the back. Then there was a middle section where if no one was in that section, a person of color could sit there. White people only could sit in the front. On that evening, Mrs. Parks sat in the middle section, but it was rush hour and she was on her way home. And after a few stops, a white man got on and stood over her, expectantly waiting for Mrs. Parks to get up. And she was holding her black handbag. She was dressed primly. She had on a little hat and a gracious coat, and she didn't move. And he said, "Ma'am, are you going to get up?" She didn't respond. She didn't move. And then in a moment, because this passenger had gone to the bus driver, burly Mr. Bates, the bus driver, "Are you going to get up? You know the law. Get up or I'm calling the police." And then Mrs. Parks, in her quiet, respectful, reserved way, said 4 small words, which now we know changed the course of history. "No, I will not." The police were called. She was hauled into a police car, taken to the police station, fingerprinted and had a mugshot taken and put in a jail cell like a common criminal. And what we know today is that her quiet action of civil disobedience started the civil rights movement, which swept around the world and brought untoward change. And after 106 days of the community boycotting the Montgomery bus system and a Supreme Court case, brought the end of segregation as we know it in the South today, because one courageous, quiet lady said, "No, I will not." And that story, as I looked at it all year, my 4th grade year, just gave me chills. Mrs. Nelson herself was a great storyteller, and I remember thinking, Mrs. Parks must have been so scared. She must have been terrified. And so I wrote that story in a letter to Mrs. Parks, and I said, "May I have one of these pitch meetings?" And I got the call that I was going to be given a 30-minute meeting with her to tell her why I should get to make her movie. But 3 weeks later, when in my beat up little Volkswagen Bug, I pulled into the lot, I was so intimidated on all sides of me. Huge black limousines were pulling in, men in suits and limousines, and it seemed like men everywhere putting up screens. Warner Brothers was putting up a 60-foot screen with cranes above me, above the parking lot, to show their latest Batman movie. And I thought, oh, do I even have a chance? And I went into that office, and that was when I found out, oh my goodness, Mrs. Chotzen, your visit with Mrs. Parks has unfortunately been cut down to just 7 minutes, because there's been a worldwide crush of producers who want to make her movie. And I was so nervous, and I didn't know, would I be able to convince her? Would I be able to get my words out? But before I knew it, I was pushed in. And there, right across from me at the table, there she was, the same little lady that years before in 4th grade I'd seen. This is a picture of her on the bus, and you can see her hair pulled back the way it was that day. The only difference was when I saw her in the flesh across the table, her hair now was completely white. And she said, "Dearie, why should you have the right to make my movie when I know you've had one hit. We see your biography here, your filmography here, but you're just starting out." And I told her I'd pull the best collaborative team together to make her story, but moreover, I'd make sure that her story got in every library across the land, and that I'd speak to children anytime I was asked. And I do that. And you see, her my story that I had written her was like, it was on the table, it was sitting there. And I stood up. I just was so emotional being in her presence. I still I get choked up when I remember the moment. Those 7 or 8 minutes before they hauled me out of there were such an emotional experience for me. And of course, the rest is history. The movie was made. I was one of the executive producers. It starred Angela Bassett. You can see her picture in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. And at the premiere above, you can see a picture of me with Mrs. Parks. It was a huge hit. It won NAACP Best Family Movie of the Year. What an experience that was. And of course, from that one story of me in 4th grade, it put me on the map. Your story can do the same thing for you. Your stories are the bridge to make people buy in or want to buy your product or your service. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how that bridge works. You see, the way we're wired, it's called neural coupling. When you tell an emotional story, the neurons are transferred to the person who's listening or seeing the story on the screen, and they become emotionally invested. They want to know the end of the story. They can't help but care. From caveman days, that's how we became community, telling stories around the fire so we could work together, strategize together. That's how the human race overcame the huge creatures and dinosaurs that were much more powerful, because they could use their brains, they could collaborate, they could work together, and stories do that for us today. It's called neural coupling. And what happens is it causes a connection that's heart to heart. An example of this, the way your story lands and becomes unforgettable, is a client I had. She was a nurse, and she'd had a practice with a partner for years, trying to get traction, trying to get people to understand what she did for other nurses. And until she told the story of how when she worked in the NICU, she had on occasion, but especially one day, to hold a dead baby in her arms and tell the mother that her child had deceased. And the grief of that followed her out into the parking lot. And she told the story of how when she grabbed her motorcycle to go home, she wanted to commit suicide. She was so filled with grief, and there was no way for her in this profession where nurses are expected to always be there and hold people up. Who holds up the nurses? And she told this story of how she wanted to crash her motorcycle on the freeway, so filled with pain of her profession. And instead, she made it home and was able to unwind in the loving arms of her husband. But most nurses don't have that. And when she told her story on the stage before hundreds of nurses, she left that stage and was mobbed by people signing up for her program, which from that day has been celebrated and is now actually a certified course in several universities, and has become a huge program of helping the nurse profession leave their trauma. That's what a story can do. And your story, your signature story, can be the bridge to help you not be salesy, but have people completely connect with you, completely want to align with you, because story is the most potent tool you have to make connection with people. If you're an entrepreneur or if you're a business person in the corporate universe, telling stories is the fastest way to get buy-in, to get connection, and as I said, to do it heart to heart. And this strategy, which is used in Hollywood, it's called the 3D strategy. Discover your stories in the highs and the lows of your life. The high highs and the low lows, those moments of wins or great losses. Why is that? Because if you share those shadow sides of yourself, those pits, like I did, those times when I was so rage filled, I was so alone, I had to drop out of college, I couldn't go forward. Those times, tell people, attract people, because now you're on the other side of it. So it attracts your just right tribe to you when you tell the lows and when you tell the highs. The time you were crowned cheerleader, or the time you won the game, or the time you turned in a paper that got 100% and got acknowledged, whatever it is. Those emotional peaks and lows are where our signature stories come from. You design them, the second D, to be colorful, these colorful characters. You start in the center of the conflict, and don't be afraid to be vulnerable. And finally, your delivery. You deliver it with presence. You put your emotion into it. You use wonderful eye contact. This strategy, these 3 simple steps of finding your signature story, designing them to rock it into the heart of your listener and to be delivered with passion and authenticity. This is what you need to do if you want to make your project sell. Harvard tells us, and Forbes as well, that if you infuse a story into your message, you have 400% more engagement with your message. 400%. So, folks, if you want to have 400% more engagement with your brand, your message, your product, or your program, treat it like a Hollywood movie. We all love movies. Treat it like a movie. As a movie producer in Hollywood today, on my 14th movie, after millions of views, I can tell you that whether you're pitching in an elevator pitch for minutes, whether you're at a networking event, whether you're before a corporate board or up for promotion, or whether you're selling as an entrepreneur or just a leader like we are in She Is Me, your story is your gold. Tell your stories. Steve Jobs tells us if you tell your stories with passion, if you tell your stories like he did to launch Apple on a dark stage, just standing there by himself in his black turtlenecks, so iconic that you can change not just a product or a market, but the world. He says the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. And that's you, that's me, that's all of us. The storyteller sets the agenda, the vision, the values for an entire generation that is yet to come. So I urge you, I ask you, consider working with me or another story strategist. Here's my brothers and sisters, each of them from that time when they were little. Each of the 7 of them was inundated with stories by me, and they all grew up to be storytellers in their own lives, real estate agents, another attorney, a doctor. But along the way, every time they were up for something, being considered for something, going after a goal or a dream, stories got them across the finish line. Stories will do the same thing for you. And it would be so my huge pleasure to work with you to discover your magnetic story. So I offer a completely gratis, complimentary opportunity for you to have an opportunity to begin your story journey with me, to find your signature story. I offer a complimentary call. You can sign up, and Lisa will post a little QR code, or you can see it here on this slide, or go to Yvonne at YvonneChotzen.com and sign up on my website. And for those of you who just want some tips and strategy, I've created a PDF of the 3 top secrets to tell your story like Hollywood. So if you want to be unforgettable and your story that only you can tell, I promise you, is unforgettable, then learn some of these strategies, incorporate them into your work and into your messaging. So many people that work with me feel like, oh, I don't really have a story like so and so or so and so. There was nothing unusual about my life. I tell you, every life has an unforgettable story that only you can tell. And so I have these strategies: discover, design, deliver. It's the discover piece in which I can help you find that signature story that's going to catapult you into the heart of your clients, your listeners, your audiences. Tell your stories like Hollywood. They'll make you unforgettable. They'll ignite your tribe to action. They'll draw your just right clients to you. Tell your stories like Hollywood, and they'll make you and your brand and your message and your program the star. Thank you so much.
Whew, Yvonne. Some stories, some of the speaker sessions go by really quick. I mean, everyone has the same amount of time, right? And some go by really quick, and some go by in real time, and some seem like they're taking forever, right? But I was so enthralled with your story, and you caught me right there in the first 10 seconds, and I've been glued to the screen. I didn't even take a video of you, which I normally do, because I was just sitting here focused and listening. Wow. Thank you so much for coming here and sharing your story. It's the first time I've heard your complete story, and I am so honored that you came to our platform and shared everything with us. It is amazing. And if I could just say, anyone listening, if you get the chance to work with Yvonne, please do take advantage of her free time that she's so generously handing out. I think I will actually.
I would love that, Lisa. I'd love to hear your story. I know a little bit of it, but I know it's amazing. I'd love to hear more.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you for this opportunity and for what you're doing, using and giving a platform for all of us to tell our stories. It's healing the world. I applaud you.
thank you. Thank you. Yes, it is my mission on this planet to raise as many women's voices as possible and to give everybody the opportunity to speak and tell their story. So thank you for joining us, for being part of this amazing community. You will forever be close to me because of it. Thank you so much.
My joy.
And stay with me, Yvonne, just for a second. We will be back in just a few minutes with Kristen Corral. So stay tuned.